Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, Kim Seltzer, a dating and makeover expert, where I will help you build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. So you are dating this great person and you are totally sexually attracted to them, but are a bit confused on when exactly to allow physical intimacy, especially as you are getting to know them. And there are all of these rules out there, right? Like when to have sex. But the truth is, and this is my belief, is that there really isn't a magic number. Each person, each connection is different and each circumstance is different. But the one thing that is important, and I think is should be a common ground, is to have healthy sexual boundaries and not use sex to seek validation or lock it in, right? Or land the deal, as they say. Healthy sexual boundaries are the guidelines and limits the individual set for themselves in order to maintain emotional, physical, and psychological safety when engaging in sexual activities with someone. And these boundaries are important because they help to ensure that both people feel respected, they feel safe, comfortable with a level of sexual intimacy being shared. And again, that's different for each person, and healthy sexual boundaries are unique. And it can change over time. The key is to communicate openly and honestly with each other, especially as you're getting to know each other when you're first dating them. And then obviously in a relationship, you're going to keep communicating that and what feels safe and comfortable for you. It's also important to understand how sex might be falsely used to create emotional intimacy. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I remember there was a client I was working with, and one of the things that she came to me for is that, she had no problem attracting men, but it was always the wrong men. And it was guys that ended up taking advantage of her, narcissists or fixer uppers. I mean, you name it, was kind of the same guy in a different costume. And what we really unveiled in our working together is that when she would meet these guys, it would often get really hot and heavy fast. It was like I would call them like tornado interactions, right? And then the tornado would happen, it would be highly sexually charged, and she would feel amazing. And she thought that this would be the one, only to her dismay is that he would end up leaving her. After the tornado happened, she was left with the remnants around her and be like, oh my God, what happened? And she admitted to me that she also grew up in a family system where feelings weren't expressed. And what she didn't realize is that she was using sexual interaction to feel. And this was a big surprise for her. And she also had a really hard time setting boundaries. And so, what I was teaching her to do is to really build more the emotional connection first before the sexual interaction. And this was a huge learning curve for her. She was not used to this. And in fact, she didn't even know how. So, we did a lot of work on emotional expression, using feeling words as she was getting to know guys to really see what guy like earned her sexual, interaction. So in the end, it was really cool. She ended up attracting this great guy who she's never experienced this kind of interaction before. And she waited to have sex with him because it was her journey. Like that was a way for her to really build something up in an emotional sense that was more intimate in that sense before she had the sex, and it became that much better. And I think they're still together today. This is years ago. So, you know, all of this to say that healthy boundaries are really important and to not use sex as a way to validate yourself. And today we have a very special guest joining. She specialized in healthy sexual boundaries, and she'll be sharing her insights on how to cultivate healthy relationship with our sexuality and why seeking validation through sex can be determined, to our well-being. Like it's all intertwined. She is a certified sex therapist who helps clients to discover their sexual selves and deepen their intimate connections. She and her staff have helped thousands of clients with sex and relationships over the last 11 plus years of her private practice. I revealed her name. She has appeared in the Daily Beast, Hustler magazine and giddy for her expertise in sexuality and is a sex and relationship pro for the Peanut app. I don't know what that is, which serves over 2.5 million women. Oh my gosh, across all stages of life. But more important, she's also from Chicago, so I love her. Heather Shannon, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you so much for
Hi.
having me, Kimmy. Excited to be here.
I know. Well, we just did your podcast. We're doing a little
Yeah.
podcast swap.
Yes. Double
And
header.
and like I could like keep going on and on with you. So I was excited that like now we're going to continue the conversation, but in your
Cool.
area of expertise. And um, I love what you're doing so much. And you and I had a conversation earlier about like there's so many people who have different issues around sex. I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
talked about enough in
Nope.
ways of how that shows up, even just in the beginning stages of getting to know people. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm super excited about this. Well, like like your podcast, I'm so interested in your story because I really don't know your story. So
I
please
know we
share.
purposely didn't share it until we were recording.
Good, good. I'm so
Yeah.
glad. The big reveal.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I came in a very roundabout way to being a sex therapist. My undergrad is in finance. So there's
Really?
that. Yeah.
I love that segue. I'm fascinated. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so I did that. I was a market research analyst. Wound up going back to grad school. I kind of just was at a point where I'm like, I know I don't mind working hard, but I just want to care about what I'm doing and,
Mm.
to be more mission driven with that. So I went to grad school, wound up being a school counselor for 6 years. And I actually loved working with students, but just kind of discovered like the bureaucracy was not my jam and started a private practice with one of my friends from grad school. And it was kind of through the private practice, and I think along with some of the things happening in my personal life at like a similar time, that kind of pushed me in this direction. So I had a couple clients who were just like amazing and like vulnerable and just going there with like the overlap of, addiction and sexual trauma and exploring gender identity and cross-dressing and sexual orientation and, all of the things. And it was just very impactful for me to realize that this is not a superficial thing. We mentioned that earlier too. Sex is not a superficial thing. It's, these traumatic experiences really linger. They can impact how we see ourselves, how we see others, our relationship quality overall. And having, fantasies that feel shameful or feeling shameful about your gender identity or your sexual orientation impacts everything and can like drive you to addiction and drive you to, depression or suicidal ideation. And so realizing, wow, this is like really big stuff. And there's not a lot of safe spaces. And I'm like super non judgmental in these areas. And it's interesting and important work. So that really kind of got me going. And then I had a breakup of a longer term relationship and also was kind of like, now that I'm single, there's some things I would like to explore as well. So I did some of my own exploring. And so I think just realizing that there's so many things we're not taught. If you want to learn about sex, you really have to seek out the right educators, the right teachers. There's also a lot of it's a pretty like uncredentialed, unregulated field, but it's something so impactful and personal and intimate. So I liked the idea of being somebody who had sort of a credentialed background that people could feel comfortable with, but then still get into these topics and help resource them. So yeah, here I am.
Oh my gosh, and thank God you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't know that you had a personal journey with it
Oh
too.
yeah.
So, like,
Mhm.
were you always a master communicator in the bedroom and like always
No,
had
oh my
healthy
God.
boundaries?
I'm sure you can imagine. No. Um,
Right.
so I grew up because we talked about how we were both good girls from Chicago. So
Yes.
I grew up very much in this like kind of good girl mentality. And
Mhm.
whereas like most teenagers have the idea like, whatever, I'm just gonna have sex and who cares about using condoms? Like it's not gonna happen to me. I was the kid that was like, oh, I'm definitely the one getting pregnant. I'm definitely the one getting an STI. For sure. Everyone else will get away with it. I will not get away with it. So that was like my belief system.
I totally get it. Yes.
A little anxious, running a little anxious there.
Right, right.
Um, and also just kind of the goody goody thing. And I was raised
Mhm.
Catholic and, went to Sunday school and even like taught Sunday school a little bit when I was in high school.
Mm.
And I wasn't in a very, like super strict fundamentalist, religious environment, but there was very much still the message that like sex is a sin before marriage. It's only when you're married. But then at the same time, I kind of knew that like 98% of the people in the church didn't wait for marriage. So I was
Right.
like, okay, this is confusing. And then I feel like sex is kind of used to sell things, but there was this real like discomfort with, my body and like going through
Mm.
puberty and like all of those things. So I very much grew up feeling like uncomfortable in my body or even being seen sexually. Um, I know you mentioned with your personal story with like your makeover and everything that there was sort of oh, people are looking at me now. And I definitely had some of that too. Like I didn't quite know how to deal with like unwanted attention. And yeah, so I think having that background, I didn't have sex till I was 24.
Mm.
So not that that's like, oh my God, so late, right? But because I had all these fears and because there was sort of some discomfort, I think, even like being flirty. And it's interesting because now I know I'm a flirty person, but like that was not always the case. And so looking back, I really took myself out of the game. I had like pre-decided no one's gonna want to flirt with me, and didn't feel good in my body. And I think through because we've talked about working from the outside in, through having some dating experiences
Mm.
and realizing, oh, people do think I'm cute. Most of these guys want to see me for a second date. Like, okay, so I had to kind of reconceptualize myself and then, eventually had the more serious relationship and, along the way just kind of realized there's a lot to explore. And I think living in Chicago, it was a little bit less sheltered maybe than the suburbs where I grew up and just exposed to different types of people and just got curious. So I think it was a matter for me of like following the curiosity gradually
Hmm.
and finding, the right people to explore with.
I love that. There's so many things I want to ask you. What you were
Yeah,
just
go for
saying,
it,
but there's
whatever.
so many. Well, because you touched on a lot of important points that was
Mhm.
embedded in some of what you were sharing. And one of the things that came to me, and I see this with my clients too, is that there's so much like shame
Yeah.
attached to sex, and depending on the age that you were also, like, I feel like
Mhm.
there's different nuances with sex depending on
Mhm.
how old you are and the generation
Mhm.
that you grew up in, and then there's the cultural differences
Yeah.
too. And so I think it's almost like the healthy boundary thing is interesting with all of that because
Mhm.
people think, oh, setting boundaries, saying no, blah, blah. Sometimes it's saying yes.
Exactly.
Right, and so I would
Yes.
love for you to
Yes.
touch upon that because I think there's like a calibration that gets to happen because I had a client the other day and she was super religious upbringing and she has all
Mhm.
this guilt, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, she wants like a physical sexual chemistry, but
Yeah.
yet she's taught not to have sex. So like what gives?
Right.
And it's
Right.
and that causes a lot of confusion in the dating world, right?
It does, and I think that a lot of us do get these messages from religion, but also, even if you just look around our country, like we're trying to legislate sex and love, like left, right, and center, you know? So we
Right.
get those messages. Then there's like what we're taught in sex ed, which is like entirely fear based. And so it was fun for me even getting trained to be a sex therapist, realizing oh my God, there's health benefits to orgasm. Oh my God, sex is actually really healthy for you on a physical level in like many ways that I never knew. How fascinating. So I think just exposing people to both sides of it, like, yes, there are risks, like there are getting in your car every day, and
Right.
there are also lots of benefits. So yeah, it took a while though to kind of come to that more balanced view with it. So
Well,
it's been
because
a
I was
journey.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you teach healthy boundaries, like, with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, like you said. So I get some people coming to me who have some kind of aversion to sex,
Mhm.
and then that's kind of the working on saying yes, like what is going on with this fear? What are the negative associations? How did they get there? And so a lot of times people think, "Oh, you're a sex therapist. How like titillating?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, sometimes, but like usually
Yeah.
not. Usually it's like we're doing detective work, we're getting to the bottom of things, we're finding, unresolved trauma and like deep psychological issues. So there's a lot of deep work involved. But yeah, so what are the aversions? Is it kind of like I have a hard time letting go of control and surrendering and feeling vulnerable, or I'm uncomfortable with my genitals because that's kind of the messaging I got growing up, especially I think for women. And or is it the flip side and it's kind of like, you know, I was brought up kind of religious, but I really like sex and I'm having kind of a lot of sex, but then I'm feeling kind of guilty and shameful about it. And I don't know how to resolve this. So, I've talked with people about the idea that you can be spiritual and sexual. Like they don't have to be mutually exclusive, and that, I respect people's religious beliefs. I'm not like trying to impose anything on them, but it's like, is this working for you? And what is, actually like a doctrine that you want to kind of buy into? And what is something that maybe was made up by the humans and not even in the scriptures? 'Cause I think there's a lot of that too, if we're being real, right? But I've also worked with people who are, like leaving the Mormon church, for example. So I think the religious component is really interesting, and that is something that comes up a lot in a lot of people's journeys with boundaries. My personal thought on like what are healthy boundaries is like, do I actually want to do this? Like that's like step one, right? Because there's a lot of sort of people
Mhm.
pleasing and like going along with things. So
Yes.
can you tune into your own body and assess, yes, I do want to do this. There's an attraction there. I feel safe. So, like, kind of assessing the physical safety. And you mentioned some of this in your opening, the physical safety, the emotional safety. And I'm not to the point where, like, oh, people shouldn't have casual sex. I think you can meet a lot of these criterias
Mhm.
with casual sex. It's like if this is somebody who can be a respectful, responsible adult with you and have some conversations, and you're both going to kind of show up that way and care about each other's pleasure and check in with yourselves, great. I think that can be super healthy. So, I don't really have sort of and you mentioned this too with like your makeovers, like I don't really have like a one size fits all approach either. It's really like, is this working for you?
I love that, and I love that you personalize it because it isn't a cookie cutter approach
Mm-mm.
here. It's like when I was talking about flirting on your podcast.
Mhm.
We all have things that trip us up, and they're different
Yeah.
for everyone. And so, how you proceed is so individualized. So, I think that's really great. Are there certain phrases or like communication tricks that you teach people when they are in a situation where they have to say no or yes?
Interesting. Are we talking about maybe like a dating situation versus
Hmm.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yes. So, because I'm dating, so like this is something I also put into practice. Not I don't
I
just tell
love
other
it.
people to do it.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you could say, okay, you know what? Like I'm really feeling this. So you want to be really clear. You're not rejecting someone if you're about to say no,
Hmm.
especially if you like them. Unless you actually are rejecting them, that's a different story. But if it's kind of like it could just be like, hey, I'm into you. I'm just like not 100% ready yet, or you know, let's see how it goes next time. And you're not being a tease, you're not leading anyone on, you're actually just being very direct and clear. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my personal approach, and I find that most people take that really well, actually. When I express the enthusiasm that the
Yes.
interest is there, people are like, "Okay, all right, well, look forward to next time then."
And that's the important piece, is that there's
Mhm.
some sort of indication and expression around the desire to, but yet
Yes.
you're still setting the boundary. I think this is where a lot
Right.
of people have a hard time because they get so black and white with it. They're like,
Yeah.
"No," but then if they say no without it being kind of fun and flirty, like there's a way of
Yeah.
delivering it that doesn't have to be so heavy too. Like,
Oh, totally. Because
you
like,
know,
I'm a goofball, I'm very playful, so,
yeah,
yeah, I
it's
would
like,
kinda be like, "Okay, so this is really fun. Totally having fun with you, and,
and
I wanna make sure we're at a point where we can talk about, if we're sleeping with other people yet, and I don't know that I'm ready for that conversation." So sometimes I will give a reason too, and
mhm.
they're kind of like, "Okay, cool, yeah, I see where that's coming from," or, whatever. Um I also would say you don't owe anyone an explanation. You can say whatever you want, but I would say, like, think about your intention with this person before you say anything. Like, is this someone you want to see again? And if not, you could just be like, oh, you know what? I'm not feeling it. You're really nice, just not quite in the same place with the chemistry. All the best to you. And I think people respond pretty well to that, not as well. The first
Right.
example, but, sometimes I will get guys that kinda want, like, an explanation,
Mhm.
kind of like, "Oh, well, why?" Or what's going on?" Or "What could I have done?" And I generally would say, "Don't get too into that with them," because it can turn into, like, a little bit of a battle.
Well, and I think that's where people struggle sometimes because I
Mhm.
find that, like, I've seen both extremes where people
Mhm.
are and there's this thing called hardballing now that's happening
Oh.
in the dating world. Yeah, I had gotten interviewed by Huffington Post on this phenomenon that it's called. I had actually had to like look it up.
Yeah, I
Like,
haven't
oh
heard
my
of
god,
this.
people are doing this. So it's like on a first date, people are like hardballing each other and saying, "This is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. Are you in or out?"
Oh.
And while I think that that's good to have some clarity in what you're
Mhm.
looking for, to be so hard nosed when you're
Yeah.
first getting to know somebody, I think can also
Right.
be a turn off.
Right.
So I think that it's important to be direct and
Mhm.
communicate that,
Mhm.
but you can also have some fun with it, like how you were
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
I was telling my clients the other day, is like, especially women, because they might get a little masculine in the way that they
Mm.
set a boundary,
Mhm.
and it's, even saying things like, "Well, good things come to those who wait," like the like things
Yeah.
like that that are
Yeah.
more flirty,
Right.
but you're still saying no.
Right.
You're still saying no.
Right.
Like, I'm not ready. And
Right.
the other thing I like what you just said is that when you say that it's usually well received,
Mhm.
that's a good indication of a good person. If it
Mhm.
is not
Yes.
well received, then
Yes.
awesome, you dodged a bullet.
100%. And I'm not like, don't shit test people where you're like trying to like see, but I do think that's a good experience to see, how does someone take a no? Can they be mature?
Yeah,
Is their ego strong enough? Do they like get really triggered and emotionally reactive? Like, that's a red flag.
100%.
Yeah,
So it works either way. I love this.
it does.
The other thing that you were mentioning when you were sharing your story is about not feeling that good in your body, like when you were going
Yeah.
through your journey. And I
Mhm.
know I went through that too. Are there certain things that you help people with so that they can embrace their body? Because I
Yeah.
do think that trips so many people up, no
Yeah.
matter what size, shape you are.
Yeah. I think it's finding the right balance, I think, of, where, like the work you do with people, I think is all about putting your best foot forward. And I think that helps people feel better in their body. But sometimes it can become more of like an obsession or a preoccupation with being a certain weight or being a certain size or having the perfect makeup or,
Mm.
thinking you need a nose job or something. And so I do think it's worth noticing, like, again, that question, is this working for me?
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes it's not. Um, but I also think our culture is a huge culprit. So I do
Mhm.
talk to people. There's just kind of some educational pieces I get into. There was like a really interesting study in the island of Fiji where they didn't used to really have any disordered eating. And then when they imported British and American media, it was like, 20 some percent of people had eating disorders within a few years.
Wow.
So so it's like to realize that, like, what we consume mentally and emotionally has such a huge impact on how we feel in our bodies. The idea that there's a right way to look, like, what if we just throw that out the window?
Yeah.
I have strong feelings about that because I do think so much of it is just fabricated. Like it's all just made up. Different looks go in and out of fashion, different body types go in and out of fashion, which kind of proves the point that like it's all kind of made up to begin with, then,
Mm.
So I kind of help people understand that. Take a look at, what are you looking at on social media? Are you following the Kardashians and everything? Not that like the Kardashians don't have any value, but like, is it all about, lip filler and waist trimmers and makeup and whatever, where it's like is that kind of most of what you're seeing? Or is there other stuff in there that like you look at it and it makes you feel good? And I encourage people to tune in with their body because you might be like, I feel happy looking at makeup stuff. I feel like I get to be creative. I get to feel like I put my best foot forward. Cool. Then that's for you. And you know it by how you feel in your body. Someone else might look at that and think like, oh my God, I have to spend like an hour a day just like go to Walmart and like look presentable. It's like, okay, then that's probably not working for you.
Right.
So
Right.
that I encourage people to just pay attention to like what they're consuming and how it's making them feel. And then the other piece I would say is taking care of your body, but taking care
Yeah.
of your body, and we talked about this earlier too, letting go of outcome. So, like,
Mhm.
what if you already felt great in your body and loved yourself? What would that look like in terms of behavior? And then just do that.
I love that. I call
Yeah.
that act as if, right? Like
Yeah,
if you
totally.
act as if until you become like visualize yourself as that like
Right.
hot vixen in the bedroom and
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and, like, even with working out, because a lot of times people will feel self-conscious when they're getting
Yeah.
naked and stuff, or even just with dating, and I see this all the time with clients. They go to the gym for 2 weeks, they haven't lost any weight, but somehow their body image is fine now. Because it's, like, the
It's
behavior,
so
it's like,
true.
you're how are you showing up for yourself? Because I think that sends a message of worth, when
Mhm.
you're doing something kind for yourself and you're coming from that place of a kind intention towards yourself in doing it, you feel better.
Well, and the thing is, it's so true, is it really is about how you see yourself
Mhm.
because you can shift the way others see you just by you seeing yourself differently.
Yeah.
I forgot what movie that was. I'll think of it later.
Okay.
It's the female comedian, she falls off a bike and before this she has trouble dating and she thinks she's ugly and
Oh, was it Amy
overweight.
Schumer?
Ish. She's someone like Amy Schumer, and I can
Okay.
never remember she's a British actress. Anyway,
Okay.
and then she hits her head and she comes to, and all of a sudden she sees herself as this like gorgeous woman, and now she's
Mm.
like attracting all these men and everything. So it's kind of to the point that
Yeah.
you're talking about. Um, and I think that, and I just wondered if there were any visualization exercises or things that like people could do to get in that state.
Mhm. I do a lot of thought work with people. So I
Sure.
use the Life Coach School's self-coaching model as sort of a template. And I just usually send people directly to their website and they have like a little thing, but I'll practice with people. And the idea of it is that our thoughts create our emotions, create our behavior, creates our result.
Mm,
So, if you're and I've seen this with myself and if you're struggling with this whole concept of how our thoughts ultimately create our results,
hmm.
it's so much easier to see it in other people. So, like
Always. Always.
yeah, I would just say, like, pick someone in your life and think about how they're creating their own reality with their shitty attitude, and, like, I guarantee you, you'll understand it. So, but then when we realize, like, "Oh, what if that's just, like, how the world works, and so I'm creating my results too with my thoughts." So when you're not liking your results, it's an opportunity to kind of go back and figure out like, okay, like what thoughts am I having that
Mm.
are making me feel lonely, that are making me feel not good enough, that are making me feel bad about my body, and then when you start to uncover those, to at least entertain the idea, like, okay, one, this isn't working. Two, I can just pick a thought that feels better.
Yeah.
you know, or at
Right.
least try, at least look for one that feels better. So I do get into a lot of the like law of attraction stuff with people
Mm.
too.
I
So
love that.
I think that people get it. And even the people that aren't as like spiritually inclined, I just explain it as the placebo effect.
Mhm.
I'm like, what we believe happens and has a very real impact on our body.
Yeah, like if you could just imagine being the character in your own movie and just like
Mhm.
walking in a room and owning it like Jessica Rabbit, you know, and just even if you
Love
don't,
that.
yeah, like that's why I love the costume so much because
Yeah.
even if you just put on a costume and pretend like you're that person, eventually you will become it. But
Yeah.
it's that process that you're talking about. I was also interested in what you were talking about, the whole validation piece. I mean, I know you heard
Yeah.
in my intro that I deal with that, but I'm curious how you teach people how to kind of more internalize themselves and their
Yeah.
self-worth
Yeah.
versus using sex.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I would maybe do some thought model stuff with that, but I probably would go more so into the internal family systems. And the
Mm,
the gist of that is that we have, different parts that kind of represent aspects of our ego, you could say. And then we have our self energy that is our higher consciousness and sort of our spiritual essence that is unaffected by trauma. And so the idea is that the more we are in the self energy, the more we are running our lives through the self energy and relating to our parts from the self energy, the better outcomes. And so when we're looking for validation outside of ourself, that means the parts are running the show. And then when we're more just being like a radiant magnet of amazingness, that's probably because our self energy is running the show and we're feeling they have like 8 C words of self energy to help you remember it. So it's like confident and clear and connected and creative and calm, and there's a few more, but
mm.
like when we're really kind of centered in that way, it's kind of like good things happen, right? So it's understanding our parts, it's relating to the parts in a way that we're, like, befriending them, and we're not trying to
Mhm.
just push them away, even though we might be like, "This part's making my life miserable. It's always so anxious," or, "It's always telling me I'm not good enough." To kind of understand, like, well, there's a reason it's doing that. Like, so let's be present with this part. And we do sort of a meditative, going inward experience a lot of times and understand how are you experiencing this in your body, this maybe neediness that's looking for validation.
Mhm.
Um, and it's cool. So we can sometimes get to a point where we access the trauma burden that's kind of at the heart of this defense mechanism and are able to release that and invite something new in. And so it really actually addresses it at the root, which is pretty rare. Yeah.
It's so important. That's why I
Yeah.
love you so much because, like, we're like sisters.
Yeah.
I know we no, but it's so true because everything's connected
Yeah.
from things that we've learned early on, and sometimes
Hmm.
you just don't even realize. I love the process that you're talking about because it almost sounds like it's retelling your story, but then flipping the script on your story and replacing it with
Yeah.
something different, with that.
Yeah.
So
Which, like, we get to pick what story we tell. Like, it's so powerful.
yes. Well, and with that being said, I mean, I could literally go on and on with you. I'm like, how did wait? Oh my
We could
God,
keep
we're
going
like,
for a
I
while.
know it's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, are there any like kind of last words of wisdom that you want to share as we part today?
I think just that it's worth getting to know yourself as a sexual being.
Mm,
There's so many areas of personal growth and development that people are into these days. And I think sexuality is one that people are still missing. So do the work.
yes,
Yeah, there's a lot of
do the work.
rewards of doing the work. Yeah.
I love it. And where can everyone find you?
Yeah. So people can find me at my podcast. So my podcast is
Yay.
called Ask a Sex Therapist. And you can also check out my website, which is just my name, heathershannon.co. Yeah, so heathershannon.co. No M.
Oh, it's one of those. Now
I
everyone's
know,
gonna
that's why I'm
remember
like, let's make
that.
sure. But yeah, so the first few episodes of the podcast are like a really good primer. So I think if people are like, what do I even need to know about sex? I kind of go through, here's all the common issues that I work with clients on, and here's sort of the foundational knowledge that I want people to have. Um, and it's kind of great if people have that before they come to me too, because then we
Right.
can sort of do the advanced level stuff and just kind of cruise through it a little faster.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for all the work that you're doing because
Thank you.
it is so important what you're doing and not enough of you. So
Yeah, I
can help people.
appreciate people like you supporting that and seeing that and
Yeah.
sharing it with your audience. So thank you. And thank you for everyone listening.
Thank you. And thank you listening, joining today. This has been the Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, of course, Kimmy Seltzer. And remember, you can build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. And if you want to know more, make sure you go to my site, kimmyseltzer.com. And if you're having a hard time creating healthy boundaries with sex or even other areas of your love life, hop on a call with me so that I can help you. And just click the link you see in the show notes to schedule that. And who knows, that one call, that seriously, that 30-minute call could change the course of your entire life. And remember, working on you is working on your dating life. That's all for now.